Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to ATG webinar, Revit, a new users forum. As the name implies, this is intended for new users, especially those coming from AutoCAD. We decided to host this forum because many design professionals have made the jump from AutoCAD to Revit over the past 20 years or so, and many more will be doing the same in the future. Is this a seamless process? Of course not. Learning a new software is never a seamless process. However, we believe the benefits of Revit transition far outweigh the burdens. Okay, a little bit about us. My name is Linn, and we have James Hughes with us, who hasn't jumped on yet, but I anticipate he'll be on shortly. We decided to host this forum because both James and I learned Revit in an architectural office with glooming deadlines. We learned it via trial by fire, as I'm sure some of you are experiencing right now. There were definitely moments of wanting to ditch the whole thing and go back to AutoCAD. Fortunately, my employer at the time, who made a commitment to Revit, and quite frankly, I didn't have a choice. So we'll just wait a few minutes.
While they're kind of warming up too, Matt, you may have kind of mentioned a couple of things to begin with. This is kind of the best use of my time, is having a discussion with a firm that's either considering transitioning to Revit, or they have started it, but they're not sure that they're doing it the best way that they can. These are the kind of discussions, I have one of these pretty much one a week, and have, as Matt has, I'm sure, mentioned in our backgrounds, I've helped more than 50 firms do this transition. And so I've kind of got a stockpile of bad ways to transition, and kind of and hopefully some tips to be able to help you guys, with what to pay attention to, so that your transition into Revit is a successful one. Matt, have you talked much about the kind of why transition to Revit?
Well, James, I basically said the burden far outweighs the benefits. I just kind of left it at that, but obviously learning any new software is a burden, and it takes time and it takes patience. But this is one worth making, because Revit, in our opinion, and in many opinions, is far superior to AutoCAD and several other drafting softwares out there as well.
I've got a question for those, for the people, the attendees here, just to kind of warm them up so that they feel comfortable putting things in the chat window. What do you think is the number one reason that Matt and some of the other tech specialists are hearing is the reason why firms are transitioning to Revit? I've kind of got a top list of reasons I'm hearing, because we always ask the question. You kind of want to pay attention to what's driving the need, and kind of what the measures of success are.
Okay, we do have a response from Edward. That's why I'm here. We're preparing to transition workflow to Revit, and that's great.
Awesome. This is our specialty.
Yeah.
If you were to look at what I do with ATG, I would say this is kind of my niche. I know Matt does a lot of transitions as well, but kind of putting together a plan for that is absolutely the way to go. I'll tell you too, here in Central Arkansas, there's a lot of people not doing it well. Of course, they did that many years ago, and sort of struggled through it. I've worked in 3 firms that did transitions, and honestly, 2 of those were real failures that I got to watch in slow motion, and one of those worked well. And then having helped just tens of firms transition well since then, I've kind of got a pretty good feel on some of the things that you do and don't want to do. Well, okay. I'll kind of throw some things out there too. I don't see any responses to why people think is the top reason that firms are letting us know they're looking at a transition into Revit. I will tell you what the best reason, or the one that I see the most success around, is a firm that's typically been an AutoCAD house, has paired up with another design firm, or they've got a client. One of the two is requiring a Revit deliverable. And that sort of not having the wiggle room, but actually having it as a requirement for the deliverable is actually the best means to sort of, I guess, force people to come up with a plan and execute on it, because architects absolutely know how to deliver on time and in the budget. And so if you make it where it's not just this back burner thing, it's not a pet project, or it's not something to research or look into, if it's a requirement for successful delivery, that's when architects really know how to make that happen.
Okay, we do have a comment here. I have noticed when I'm modifying a drafting detail, I cannot create lines that are too small.
Oh, yeah.
What is the problem with Revit on displaying elements too small?
Yeah, and it's somewhere less than 1/8 of an inch. If you start drawing like real fine detail, if you start drawing the threading on the bolts, then you'll run into this issue. Or if you scale a detail down itty bitty that had a whole bunch of detail already in it, then you might run into that. It's actually kind of rare to run into the too small elements. I hate to say you just draw it a little bit bigger, but if you've got lines that are less than 1/16 of an inch, actually be thankful that Revit's doing that, because it is keeping you from having fragments of things that you will never find. If it creates something that's less than 1/256 of an inch long, then you will probably never be able to select that. Especially, well, even if you had thin lines on, you probably wouldn't see it to select it. It also gives you a warning if you draw slightly out of axis. And a lot of people ignore that one, but if you do that, it's your peril, because if you draw a wall that's slightly off axis, because maybe you've taken some measurements in the wall and you're trying to draw existing conditions actually as they are, there's a very good chance that later you'll try to put a window or a door or something hosted into that wall, and Revit will just not, or it will not cut the void out properly. I've seen some weird things happen if you try to put geometry that's trying to be straight in slightly off straight geometry.
In addition, when you do have a ton of warnings, and when I say a ton, I'm talking hundreds, it will start to slow your file down, and ultimately it could lead to corruption, which is very rare, I should say. And that's when you get up into several hundred.
Corruption's not rare, but yeah, for that reason it is.
Yeah, you need to just kind of monitor your warnings, and the warnings is in the Manage tab, and you can see it, and it'll have a running tab of how many you have. And it's good practice, especially at the end of a deliverable, to just kind of go through those warnings and address the ones you can and get rid of as many as you can. Now, you don't need to keep down to 0. And in fact, it's very difficult to have 0 warnings all the time. But that's the goal. And if you can keep it down, less than 100, 20 or less is probably.
You can have 0 warnings the first day.
Yeah.
But yeah, you should have if you have a BIM manager, not everybody does. I mean, ostensibly, a lot of the people that are attendees to this don't have any BIM person. They're all sort of either about to transition or they have just started making that transition. But it is advisable that you have a BIM coordinator or a BIM manager. Larger firms are going to have a manager and a coordinator. Their job role might be more about linking together the Revit files and sort of maintaining, pushing and pulling models between consultants. A BIM manager is basically going to be the same. That's all those same set of roles, except they're also going to be setting standards for BIM, and they're also going to be crafting and maintaining the template and crafting and creating families within Revit, which is a really big part of the job that a lot of firms that transition don't do well, because they start thinking, well, I guess we'll just work with out-of-the-box Revit content, and then they run into some dead ends, and then they just run to Revit City or some other place, and they're like, oh, that looks close. And they work with that. But you have to have somebody or somebodies in the firm that are comfortable building families from scratch and do a good job of that, so they don't make broken families that contribute to corruption. Because fully 1/3 of your construction document time can be someone either procuring families or creating them from scratch. It's an extraordinary amount of time that goes into that, which makes curating a library of those families a very big deal. It's something that isn't a back burner project. That needs to be something that receives intentionality and receives the best work of some of your best Revit users.
Okay, we do have a follow-up question. It says, I've noticed the import CAD to Revit tool doesn't like certain CAD drawings, hence the small elements. So I'd like to ask a question to that question, and I'm sure James might be thinking the same thing, but
I am.
So if you're trying to explode a DWG,
I knew you were going there.
That's not encouraged. would be the nice way to say it. If you explode a lot of CAD details, it starts to add a lot of extraneous information into your Revit file that is not only not useful, but damaging to your Revit file.
Yeah.
For example, AutoCAD has CTB files, and it has a lot of embedded information which transcribe colors into line weights. Revit does not use those CTB files, but it will retain that information and just kind of dumps it in there. It takes line styles, all that information that is quite useful in AutoCAD, and dumps it in your Revit file, and it just explodes or explodes probably not word. It makes your file size much larger unnecessarily, which could also lead to.
Yeah, and in Josh's defense, there is one and only one reason in my book to ever import and explode a detail. And let me say, you never, ever, ever do that in your project. You always do it in a proxy project. The only reason to ever import instead of linking a CAD detail is if you are going to transition that CAD-based detail to using Revit objects, such as detailed components, filled regions, masking regions, Revit text and dimensions, all the annotative components that you want they're going to give you a leg up on if you leave that as a CAD detail. But yeah, you could run into an issue in the proxy project exploding it. But man, I name my proxy projects like explosion zone or erase this.rvt just so I know exactly what to do with that. Just get rid of it after it's served its purpose. So other than that, you always want to link in your CAD files and don't embed them. Don't insert them or import them.
And we appreciate the questions, Josh.
Yeah. I will try not to cast any kind of judgment or shade. I just come in with this type of webinar. I come in with a lot of opinions, if you couldn't tell.
Right. And I used to do exactly what I'm telling you not to do. And I've learned from experience. So
well, and we train people not to now when we Revit train. Matt and I both train people in Revit.
Yeah. We appreciate the feedback, Josh. Any other questions or any other
so we haven't gotten any guesses from people what the top reason that we're hearing for Revit transition. Let's go ahead and answer it. Matt, what's kind of at the top of your list? What are you hearing the most? And then I'll follow up.
Well, it's several reasons, but ultimately they're being forced to.
Yeah.
Forced to by either, like as you mentioned earlier, it could be a project requirement from the architect, and maybe you're a consultant. That's one idea. It could be required by the client. The client may have an FM model that they're going to use for facility management moving forward, in which case Revit would be required. And then other people just kind of feel like it's time to make that jump. I think Revit I think it's safe to say, has become the industry standard, and most people would like to kind of keep pace. What do you think, James?
Well, it has become standard. And in fact, Matt, you probably haven't had to do a Revit demo since you've worked with ATG. I know back when I came on at 2015, I used to think, oh, now I'm gonna have to be that person that goes into a firm and is like, well, show us that Revit's faster than AutoCAD. Man, we actually don't even have to have that conversation anymore because the industry has proven it out over 20 years. And so there aren't many people who are like, I don't know if it's faster or not. Everybody kind of knows that with very few exception, there are some very specific AutoCAD workflows that are still going to get you a faster product as a deliverable in AutoCAD. But for most people, that whole middle portion of the project in design development, when you're generating elevations, sections, enlarged plan views, all of that, you can do 80% of a view's work in like 7 seconds. I mean, it's pretty self-evident where you pick up speed using Revit. But honestly, Matt, the funniest and the truest reason that I'm hearing, and this is the second most, you took my answer, which is we're being forced. That is the top answer, and luckily that's the best chance of success. The weakest chance of success is it's January 20th, and we just got back from a partners meeting, and we decided 2020 is the year that we should maybe look at transitioning. Okay, what's driving this need for transition? Well, we think it'd be a good move for our firm. I mean, if there's actually nothing compelling other than a general notion from leadership there's very poor numbers, that one's actually going to take off. And the secondary reason that I enjoy hearing the most, and the honesty of it, is we are having trouble retaining and recruiting new talent. And I just love the honesty, because that takes some pride swallowing to actually say that to us. And I kind of realize that this is a firm that actually has lost out on this. And I hear it quite a bit. I would say probably 10 of the firms that I've transitioned have done it because it really hurt to lose somebody, and they've had some interviews where they thought that they were going to get somebody, and then they went to some other snazzier firm. And of all the reasons to come to Revit, that one's kind of the strangest one, but I'm happy that those firms kind of saw that need.
Yeah. Okay, we have a follow-up. Thank you, Josh. Revit transition because architects like it and screws with other disciplines. I think that's funny. Josh, if you could go ahead and fill in what discipline are you representing?
Not architecture.
Yeah, we can see. Yeah, we can see it's not architecture. MEP,
yeah, there we go.
okay.
MEP.
MEP has actually come a long ways for Revit. In the very beginning, it probably wasn't that great, and electrical was probably the last to get on board. They kind of pushed mechanical plumbing, and now I'd say MEP is actually very good. And we do have some other folks here at ATG that could help you guys with this transition if you guys want to dig further. It's definitely helpful for electrical. Okay, we can definitely help you there. I mean, I would say if Revit does have a weak point, it's civil. That's the one spot that really hasn't caught up to the other disciplines, but MEP is quite good now, and we'd love to talk with you, Josh, further, offline about your electrical needs.
Yeah, honestly, I'm not sure that civil's ever going to fully integrate into Revit, because Revit's, pretty late in its life cycle, honestly. I mean, we're 20 years in. And there has been, and most architects aren't really aware of the full range of Autodesk products, but there's one called Civil 3D that is basically built on AutoCAD, but it's a fully BIM product. And man, it has everything the civil engineers need. And Autodesk has shown no intention of baking it into Revit or sort of trying to merge those two together. So I think that those will stay apart, but they have improved the workflows of taking site surveys and bringing that in as topo surfaces inside of Revit, and also for doing survey points and actually geodetically locating your project in real world coordinates. That's gotten better as well.
Now, James and I do have our Revit open right now, and we'd be willing to kind of dive into any of these and show you a demo or example. Do any of these look appealing that you'd like to see? Maybe you tried, or maybe we could just kind of run through the user interface, James, and see if that sparks anything.
You could. I think there's probably still just a few more conversations that we can have around the edges of sort of strategy and why transition and things to watch out for. And then as soon as I see a question pop up in chat that wants to see something specific, we can jump right into that. One of the things to watch out for if you're planning a transition into Revit is, one of the firms that I worked for decided, we're going to kind of take the dip your toe in the water approach, which when you look at it and you plan it out and you write out steps on paper, it sounds completely rational and safe. It sort of mitigates or manages the perceived risk of a transition. But one of the firms that I worked for decided that any project, and I forget exactly where they drew the line. This is several years ago. I think it was at $1.5 million. So if any project that's $1.5 million or over, then we will try it in Revit, because there was an associate who really wanted to work on Revit projects and they wanted to retain that associate. And so what ended up happening were all of the large juicy projects kept going to, and I'll call him Matt since you're Matt, but all of the large juicy projects started going to Matt, the associate, middle management, and then all of the crummy re-roof jobs and parking lot jobs and post office jobs kind of kept coming to the other associates, and they started getting resentful of Matt, and it caused this unforeseen, really awkward political situation. And Matt was asking me to help him to be able to deliver these projects. And now all the other associates are upset with me because I'm, giving my time to his projects instead of, helping them with theirs. So ultimately Matt left that firm and they did not transition. I shouldn't laugh about it, but it's kind of, now I can look back on it and think, yeah, that I could see how that would cause a weird political thing that would be hard to see.
Yeah. Okay, James, I just noticed we have had some questions pop in that weren't in the chat, but in the question and answer. So I've opened up
Yeah, I've had chat open instead. Yep, there's Q&A. Let me open it too.
Yeah. So we have, what are some of the best practices for migrating AutoCAD detail notes to Revit Keynote system? And then we have a similar question. Do you have a way of implementing user keynotes in a drafting view? So that's a great question. And there's a lot of discussion about keynotes. There's two basic methods you can go about keynoting drawings. And I'll just quickly show both. And there is a quick way and there's a really good way to migrate from AutoCAD. Okay, so here in the user interface, over here in the Annotate tab, and just a quick note, this is really helpful to new users that I always point out. We have a lot of tabs up here and you spend most of your time in this one, and in this one. And the biggest difference between Architecture tab and Annotate tab is anytime you're working in this tab, which it's grayed out for the most part because I'm in a drafting view. So if I come over here, anytime you're in the Architecture tab, just know that you are populating the model in a 3-dimensional method, and it will populate in all views. Views are simply cuts of your model, okay? By contrast, when you are in the Annotate tab, these are what's called view-specific commands, and it's only represented in the view you're in. So when I use any of these commands, again, Annotate tab in here, they will only be shown in the parapet detail, which is a drafting view. And again, these are grayed out because these are specifically for model element.
Hey, Matt, this detail, is it still an AutoCAD detail or has it been transitioned over to Revit?
It's Revit.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I see it now.
Yeah, this is Hotel Final. You recognize it, James?
I do. That's the parapet detail.
Okay. Okay, so the first one is using the traditional Keynote here, which is, again, in the Annotate tab, Keynote. And you have several options here, and we're not going to dig too deep into them, but I'm going to use this one for drafting view. And you come over here. This is your type selector, and you can choose any one you want. I'll do Keynote Box. And then, let's see. It's not working because there's no elements to grab. Okay, bad example. I'll come right back to this one. Okay, so I'm going to jump over to a plan real quick. Okay, Keynote, and this time I'm going to use Element. Like I said, there's three different options. There's Element Keynote. So if I point to this, it brings up the Keynotes dialog. So specifically, the question was how to migrate from AutoCAD. This entire dialog is reading a text file. So if you have a database in AutoCAD, all you have to do is load this text file into here, and then these become your keynotes. Now, this is the one that comes out of the box from Autodesk. And you can see it's divided by division. So what do we have here? We're looking at a column. So I could go to concrete, structural concrete. We'll say that's a 12 by 12 column and say, okay. Okay, and it'll fill out automatically like so.
Got a question from Josh. How did you get the plus?
The plus. I'm not following. Do you understand?
If I knew which plus he meant, I would have said it.
Okay.
Like, where did the tree come from? Okay, yeah. So as soon as he striped it with the user keynote, it opened up, in that case, CSI division for the keynote, because that's what his keynote text file is written as. Yeah.
Oh, are you talking about these pluses?
I think so.
Okay, great question.
Where did the tree come from? Yeah.
So the tree is how it's drawn in your text file, and it uses what is it called? Tablature something. I forget the exact name, but it's James could probably think of it. It's tab something. It's what you call certain text
delineated
files.
or delimited.
Yeah, there you go. All right, so if I come to Keynote settings, here's where it's drawing from. Okay, so I'm going to take this and I'm just going to copy this and open this text file. I'm working on another screen here. Hang tight.
Hey, Matt, the reason why the detail view that you had just a minute ago would not keynote is because that was simple line work. It wasn't brought over to be detail components yet. Now you could change some of those components out to be detail components, and then those will, that keynote system will be basically tied to it.
Okay. Thanks, James.
Yep. Wow, we're opening up the Keynote file during this presentation. You're trying to spook people.
No. I'm just trying to answer the question.
Mm-hmm.
So this is relating directly back to the plus sign question. So this is simply a tab delimited file, whatever it's called. And then, so here's the keynote itself, and here's the description of that keynote. Okay. Same thing here, division 0, division 1. Now, there must be one tab between here and here. It's looking for that tab, and that's how it recognizes it. After that, if you have another tab and then something here, it will file this under there. Okay? That makes sense? Anytime you have a tab, and you can keep going. So if we go down further, I'm sure there's some examples where
at some point an architect's going to look up and be like, man, I didn't go to school to be a coder. You can work with just the basic CSI division Keynote. That's what most firms start with before they start modifying it, or before they overhaul it.
Right. Okay, so you can see this one, it will be filed directly under division 1, and this one will be another plus sign filed directly under this one. So if this does not go all the way back to the top, but here instead, it'll be a second plus sign. Okay, so that's how the tab system works. I'm going to come back out.
Yeah, and Josh, to answer your follow-up question, yeah, that's the out-of-the-box Revit Keynote file. It's just a TXT file that gets installed when you install Revit.
And so you can see that's exactly what we were looking at right there.
Yeah. Now, Matt, there's 3 different ways to keynote something. Matt chose the user-defined one, which lets him browse to it and assign one to that. Click on the down arrow under Keynote, and I'll just verbally tell you just about these other 2 to really over-answer it. You got Element and Keynote and Material Keynote. Element Keynote you would use if you want to point to a 3-dimensional or a modeled object like the sink or like something else that's there. And then it actually, and he's got it highlighted right there, it fills in a parameter value that is tied to that 3-dimensional element. And so anywhere in the model that you see that element, whether it's in section or wherever, it will keynote with that same keynote. And you don't have to use a number system. You can actually have it use plain text as well. The other part too is you've got a material keynote. So if you're doing a wall section as an architect, you can point to the sheathing and make it say 3/4 inch plywood sheathing, and it will actually recognize the material value. Well, actually, I wouldn't be specific and say 3/4 inch plywood because you might actually have 1/2 inch as well, and it would get confused. But it actually will park that data with that material. So the plywood itself would then have a keynote value that's assigned to it. And whenever you do a user keynote, that's normally going to be for your detailed components, which are flat 2D view specific, like flashing or something like that. Awesome question. Let's see.
So here's just a continuation of exactly what James is talking about. In the first case, that parameter value was assigned to the element, as the name implies. This one is a material keynote, and it is applied to the material right here, and It's indicated right there. So it's just 2 different places of storing that data. It's just assigning a value, and you can assign it to either the material or the element itself.
Yeah.
And ultimately, they both make it to the same legend. So it's not like you can only use this one or only this one or only this one. You use all 3 of them, and they'll all make it to the same legend.
Yeah, and the legend populates itself based upon which keynotes are in use on that sheet, which is real slick.
You can do it per sheet or per project, either way.
Yep. Yeah, some people are like, well, yeah, I want to do it per, well, that's fine too. You can do that. I don't mean to impose my own standards on people. So look, another way I've seen a bad transition into Revit is by basically, having a new hire and saying, here's, a 4-year-old Revit book that we got from a training 4 years ago. Read up on that because we need you to start such and such project in Revit in about 2 weeks. So chop, chop. I actually had that scenario happen to me here in Central Arkansas, and became a quick study as best I could. Watched a bunch of YouTube videos, and being self-taught, there's nothing wrong with that, but you are going to have lots of fundamental gaps in your knowledge because if you haven't had to solve for a problem before, then you just don't know that thing. And so you don't really build a cohesive foundation where you kind of learn all the things that you should learn together, whether you learn from a book as that structure or you do instructor-led training. Some people are now training in college as well.
Okay,
We got a question from Chris here. So Chris says, when looking at a roof and plan view, I'm seeing that the rake edge lines show at the appropriate line weight, but the overhang edge lines are half as thick, sliced right down the center. The valley lines are super thin, less than a number 1. If I use the line work tool on these lines, it will fix each case. My question is there a step setting that will fix this automatically? You could jump into, okay, you're going to look upstream at object styles. We'll see if it's there first and then visibility graphics. Yeah, expand that, dude.
Okay. So yeah, kind of as James alluded to, there's kind of 3 tiers of controlling line weights. I went straight to the top.
Yeah.
So if you go to manage object styles, and you can see there are some subcategories specifically for roofs, which you're asking for. And here's where you're controlling those lines. There's your gutter, there's your fascia, there's your common edges, which would be your ridge. So if you go manage object styles, this is controlling all of the line weights in the entire project unless overridden.
Yeah, at the macro level.
Yep, this is the top of the tree. Okay, so coming down one layer, you could also say, go to visibility graphics.
Under view also, if you don't want to, I always type in VG, but I make myself go click it out of the toolbar to show new people.
Right. Okay, so yeah,
got a view filter.
Down is visibility graphics. Sometimes you may open this up and you say, this is completely grayed out, and you just may, this is where you go to lunch completely frustrated and say, why can't I access that? When you see that, right down here, chances are you have a view template applied. Okay, so you can come in here and modify it here, but for now, I'm just going to turn it off. So we can go back to visibility graphics. And then you can see if you go down to roofs as well, you basically have the same type of options. Mm-hmm. And if it's white here, it's looking to what we looked at the first time, which is the object styles. If it's white, it's looking there. Or if you want to override it in this view, you can override it here and change the weight.
Mm-hmm. And there's one more step downstream from this before you get to line work, which is where Chris is doing it the most manual way. You can actually click on the roof itself and then right click and choose override graphics and view by element, which is what he's clicking on. And then that will only make that selection have those properties in that view, but it will still do all of the roof at once. So you don't have to individually do each, stripe each valley with a different line. Woo! That is an interesting and bold choice there, my friend.
Okay, looks like you want to drive for a bit, James?
No, man, you're doing good. I'm just going to kind of I've kind of got my own agenda here because the same sort of discussions that I have with a firm that's kind of putting together a plan. One of the other things, and I could keep going on about bad ways to transition in Revit because they're making up new ways to do that. Let me talk a little bit about the bell curve of adoption.
Okay, real quick, James. Sorry, I don't cut you off. We do have a couple questions in the question and answer that we haven't addressed yet.
Oh, I closed the Q&A. Had chat open.
Our construction and demo notes are a number with a square or octagon respectively. The notes are the documented as the list, the user reference notes via the corresponding number. What is the best? Okay, so when I grabbed this, this is going to be a lengthy answer, and I'll try and shorten it as much as I can. When I grabbed this, this was a specific type of Keynote. In this case, it's called Boxed Small. Okay, this is created as a component family, and that pulls the graphics for the Keynote. Okay, you could also make one that's an octagon.
Mm-hmm.
You could go either way with that. And so that's how you would make those two respectively. Now, when I started the Keynote conversation, I said there's basically two methods. This is the preferred, in my opinion. I don't know what James thinks.
Not for firms in transition. Not many firms transition and jump immediately to doing Revit Keynote systems. Most of them do dumb keynoting because that's what they've been doing, and that's a pretty easy lift for them.
Okay, so when James says dumb, what he means is there's the alternative of going with
unintelligent.
a symbol.
I don't know.
So there is a symbol, which is also under the Annotate tab. Again, so this means it is view specific. If you go to Legend, here are all of the, symbols. Here are all the symbols that are represented currently in the project. We have a center line, we have a life safety arrow, and a north arrow. Okay. Now, you can go and make, so where did these symbols come from, and why are there only 3 in the project? All it's doing, it's looking for generic annotation component families.
Yep. Okay.
So over here in your project browser, you see your annotation symbols. So we have a lot of component, so let me back up. There's 2 basic types of family. There's a system family, and those are things like walls and floors and roofs and ceilings. System families are created in the RVT, which is the Revit project, which is what we're in right now. When I say RVT, I'm talking about the extension right here. Okay, system families are created and live only within the RVT. Okay, component families are, to put it in AutoCAD terms, is more like an AutoCAD block, where you can save it out into its own specific file, and you can bring it into, those have the extension RFA for Revit family. Those can be brought into the RVT project for use within the project, very similar to an AutoCAD block. Okay, so the symbols is looking for the component family that has the category of generic annotation. And in this case, we got center line, life safety. So it's looking here. If I were to go open this family, if I went to, where's the category? There it is. If I went to category, I know it's a generic annotation, and that's why it's populating as a symbol.
Matt, we got 3 new questions. I hate to hustle you along, but we're not going to be able to show people how to create families from scratch. I don't think in this one.
Okay, so I'll punt, but I'll wrap up real quick. Coming back to the question, you can make an octagon or a square or a rectangle, whatever shape you want, and then you can use that as a keynote, and it's, as Jane determined or dubbed a dumb keynote.
Yeah, it's just a label with an instance parameter on it, and it lets you click in it and type in a number. You know, you can type in keynote number 3, and you could type in whatever you want, just like you do in AutoCAD, and then point it to a thing. It doesn't carry intelligence. It's not going to schedule itself, but it will graphically point to a thing and say a number.
And you actually, just to clarify, you can schedule the note block itself. So it's not scheduling Revit elements, it's just scheduling the symbol itself. Okay, let's move on.
All right, so we got, wow, which one? So there's a comment from Terry. He says that when you're assisting with AutoCAD and Revit transitions, success depends on 3 things: clear understanding of objectives, non-change resistant mindset of users, and commitment from leadership. Terry, that's kind of the first phase of it, and normally people bring those 3 things when they talk to an ATG. They've already internally kind of resolved, you know, this is what we need to do, this is why. And honestly, some of them can do it before everybody's on board. It's been my experience. I've never actually had a training out of, gosh, about 90 trainings. I've never had one where someone's sitting there with their arms folded like, yeah, but I bet I could do it better in AutoCAD, you know, which I always thought I would have that. But man, when you get to the point of training, people just get with the program. They're like, you know, this is my livelihood. I'm going to learn a new and beautiful thing. And I might grumble later, but you know, I'm going to get on board for right now. But I would add to that, your second phase of sort of implementing or planning, I've basically become convinced that there is only one school or main way to do the transition, and that is sort of a hybrid or a variant of what you might call a cold turkey method. Although true cold turkey would be like, as of this date, drop what you're doing. We're a Revit shop now. You know, that. I don't recommend that. But I think what I've seen successful is when you set a timeline in the future, preferably somewhere around a month and a half to 2 months in the future, preferably there's something that's kind of forcing that, or it's really advantageous if you deliver via Revit starting on that project in a month and a half to 2 months. And so you've got that as your end goal. It's kind of a medium range end goal. It's in the same business quarter. And then the most important part is that, you know, new projects from that day forward are going to start in Revit, but all of them that were already started in AutoCAD stay on in AutoCAD because it's not worth transitioning those. And then the third component that's important with that is to make sure that your users have all of the training that they need to be successful. I said 3, there is a 4th. You need to make sure that your Revit template is in good shape. It doesn't have to be perfect. It will not be perfect for a newly transitioned firm, but you need something in place that has a title block plus about 20 other things. And we've kind of got a list of things that we create whenever we create templates for firms. And we kind of might make that, yeah, we can make that available in links or something after this. I don't know how we'll do it yet, but if you guys want to sort of run down a checklist of ATG said our template needs to have these 20 things, then that's helpful to make sure that your template's in shape and you've trained people and you've got an objective a month and a half, 2 months out, then you're set to go. Now I've said my piece. We can get technical now that I've kind of provided a sort of an overview of how you plan for a transition.
But I would completely agree with Terry's comment, though. Just in general, I completely.
You have to have those 3 things to begin with.
Yeah, great
Maybe not 100% buy-in from everybody. I've seen people go in where they're not convinced, or not everybody's convinced, and I've seen that work well too.
Okay, we have another question from Sonia. I am new to Revit and currently learning on the job. Here's an issue I have. How do I create a structural CMU wall that has 3 different types of CMU courses?
Yeah, you got 2 ways. You can either create the individual walls themselves and situate one on top of the other, or you could roll the dice and try using Revit's stacked wall. Stacked wall's bitten me so many times, I use it as plan B. But you can create a stacked wall that basically is a container of 3 different walls, and you just set the height, you know, from the base up 4 feet, it's wall A, from 4 feet to 12 feet, it's wall B, and from 12 feet to varies, so whatever height is above that will be wall type C. You can do something like that. I like using my hands to describe them instead of Revit.
Okay, how do y'all feel about Dynamo? Okay, Dynamo is definitely beyond a new user's realm. In fact, we have just a few people here at ATG who are really considered wizards with Dynamo. I like it. I think the learning curve is extremely steep. In general, the realm of thinking in Dynamo is not suited to your standard architect or MEP or engineer. It's really suited more towards someone who has an inclination towards code writing or writing software.
It's unclear whether or not the profession is actually pivoting to embrace that, or if it's just a differentiator for firms that are able to hire typically a young talent that can do that. It is inarguably beneficial. Nobody's wasting their time learning Dynamo. It is a beautiful thing. I can't quite say it's the future, but generative design in general is the direction that Autodesk is headed, and it is the direction that the industry is slowly moving towards. We like it. You should look into it. I've done the Dynamo Primer. I just went to, was it dynamobim.org? I forget the original website for it, but a few years ago, I did their primer, which is just an introduction. It's here's some basic lessons on how to visually script. And it's a good place to start. Most people should at least do that and kind of see what it can do for them. Got a comment that template would be great. Templates are essential. It's not like an AutoCAD template where it's optional. You will waste a lot of time if you don't have a great template. It's worth the time that you spend. Look to spend a minimum of 20 hours building a template. If you're kind of new to template builds, you need to chalk that time out in your future to make sure that you build it correctly.
Okay, James, let's jump over to the question and answer.
Yep.
We have one here. Mechanical schedules are typically well on the way of being completed before the drawing is completed. Does Revit have a capability similar to OLE links?
Yeah,
and I'm not familiar with that. Is that an AutoCAD term?
I believe that the question is, yeah, like AutoCAD, you can embed a schedule and it will update. And so Revit has the capability to push out to a schedule. And there is third-party software of which CTC, which we sell, has the ability to either pull in from Excel format, or there's a tool that lets you stay within Revit and make changes to it, which would be less that workflow. But you can, like if you're an interior designer and you want to do finishes inside of Revit, is way faster to use a tool such as that Schedule Excel to be able to kind of work within Revit, do basic features like copy and paste, which even, you know, out of the box Revit scheduling can't do that. So it can make doing math formulations or basic Excel features very quick. But yeah, Brent, you can link in scheduled work or Excel or spreadsheet work that's already been started and push that into Revit. Rather than having it as a dumb screenshot, though, you do want to bring over its intelligence.
Okay, we have another one. Can I change my ribbon to not show everything, only show certain things that from different parts of the ribbon, perhaps? So coming back to my screen, up here is where you can customize. This is your one spot to customize.
Yeah, and you should.
Yeah, so say I use detail line a lot. I can say add to quick access toolbar. So that's what your quick access toolbar is. Or if you don't like this one, say I don't use this one very often, I can remove from quick access toolbar. So here's really your main customization. These pretty much get left alone.
You can disappear. I think it may be a new feature, but you can actually make the structural, if you're an architect and you don't want to see structural or systems, you can disappear those tags or those tabs. I mean, I did that and then I'm like, oh no, I need to get those back so that I can actually instruct people.
Maybe
I offer no solution of how to do it. I just know I've done it.
Okay. Are we caught up with the questions? Template would be great. Yes. Yeah.
Right on. So anyhow, like I mentioned before, you need a variation of the cold turkey method to be able to swap over. That's what I have seen almost 100% success. And we check back with firms and kind of see, you know, whether or not they've actually implemented it and are using it. So if you've got a pressure deadline or deliverable that's kind of driving the whole thing, that's best measure. And then all the 7 things that between Terry and I we've mentioned, you put all of that together in a plan that's not a long-term plan. It's like a 2-month max plan, and you've got everything that you need to be able to transition properly. If you don't train people or you don't have a template, you're going to have a rough time. And so it is absolutely worth the investment to not just put together a plan, but to provide all of the ingredients that you need for success. You're also going to discover that it's mostly a perceived risk. And it's easy for me to say, but you know, when a firm looks at what their schedule is like delivering an AutoCAD deliverable, and they think, man, how long is it going to take for us to get up to speed to that? You know, there's this kind of feeling that their world will kind of crumble down. And I actually don't know of any firms that did a transition to Revit and it caused an implosion of their business. It's mostly just kind of a perceived or a felt risk. That doesn't mean it's not real. You still need to take steps for that success, but that should embolden leadership to be able to say, look, all of our peers pretty much have done it. Now, I didn't talk about the adoption curve, but Revise It was purchased around 2000 by Autodesk, and until 2007, you had only 25% of adoption. This is a McGraw-Hill study that they did, I think around 2013. And so you had 25% adoption by 2007 over that 7-year span. And then from 2007 to 2012 is the 25th to the 75th percentile. So that's the hump and the other side of it. And so by 2012, 75% of your competitors have transitioned over to using Revit. And since 2012, I joined ATG in 2015. I've kind of been chasing the long tail of adoption, people that have good reasons why they have stayed in AutoCAD, and firms that have had bad reasons. We know this and we can deliver by this. And kind of the only firms that I have had conversations where it's like, well, maybe we don't have all the ingredients for you to do a transition to Revit yet. They tend to be highly customized residential shops that don't do much custom work. And so if they've spent time developing plans that have a whole bunch of layers, and they say this plan calls for kitchenette 7B, so we turn off all the other kitchenette layers and turn that layer on, and they can do that for these different options and squank out a set, then yeah, that's a pretty, that's a workflow that's been perfected over 25 years. So, that's pretty fast. Laggards. We're not calling anyone laggards or Luddites. I'm incredibly gracious and understanding of firms that have their reasons for staying in. Can we explain work sets? Verbally, absolutely. If you're in an AutoCAD workflow, if you're smart, you get in early in the morning and you open every project you might touch that day. Floor plans, elevations, all of it, and that locks your coworkers out and they can't move the chains on you. And so that's how AutoCAD system works. Inside of Revit, instead of you having 50 DWG files for a typical project, you have one RVT project file that everybody works within. And so when you set up work sets, you are basically enabling the project to be used by multiple users. If you're using Revit LT, you can't do this. That's the main reason why you shouldn't use Revit LT unless you're a sole proprietor. If you have multiple people that need to get into a job, you turn on work sets on day one. That creates a central model, and then that acts as a referee or as a librarian to check out segments or parts or components of the model in a first come first serve basis, which is how most architecture firms do it. They just accept the default work sets. Or if you've got a larger project or you're a multidiscipline firm, you can actually create work sets and place certain kinds of things into that work set. So if you're an architecture shop that has 2 interior designers, you might create an interior design work set, and then only those users manipulate those objects. They're checked out to them. And so that kind of can keep someone from grabbing furniture to move it around, and now your interior designer can't actually do that work until they relinquish that object. So Josh, hope that verbally answers your question. I could show you the 8 steps for setting up work sets. We cover stuff like that during training to make sure that every user can create a central model and they're ready to rock and kind of tell the whole team when the project's ready for them to start modeling in. And
we just want to reiterate, we do appreciate all the questions. That was obviously the driver of this webinar.
Yeah.
If we didn't have any questions, it would have been awfully quiet. So